We are giving all praises to God, honor to the pastor, to you, my brothers and sisters in Christ. It is again a joy and honor and a privilege to be in the house of the Lord. Y'all feel all right this morning? This is a good day to serve the Lord. I said this is a good day to serve the Lord. Truly, there is a word from the Lord this morning. I have to apologize in advance because we're not going to be out here by noon. Just about figured that out. We're not going to be out by noon. But we're going to look at the first book of Samuel.
All right.
This is not a comfortable book, but there is a word from the Lord.
All right.
And in that third chapter of the first book of Samuel, I'm just going to read the 10th verse. We read from 2 all the way down to the 10th verse earlier, but this time I'm just going to read the 10th verse because this gives us the essence of what we're talking about this morning. It says, "And the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth." And we're going to use for our subject this morning, answering the call.
All right.
Answering the call. And truly a call has gone out this morning. The call has gone out in this nation. During these times, God is calling somebody to do something, and we are sitting back comfortably, ignoring the call.
All right.
So the message this morning is answering the call. I believe that everyone can recall a time in their childhood when mama and daddy would stick their head up the front door and call your name when you were a child. For some, it was late in the evening and the sun was going down, or there was some chore that had to be done. Some heard their parents' voice and they would come running immediately. That's one of the kids I was. If mama or daddy hollered out my name, I was already in trouble. But other kids in the neighborhood and kids we'd be playing with, sometimes mama and daddy would call and they would act like they didn't hear mama and daddy call. And mama and daddy might call 2 or 3 times before they would finally answer that call. Some heard their parents and they would go running right away. Yet others would let mama and daddy call a few times, but somehow it seemed like they always knew what mama and daddy's breaking point was, and they would make it home on time. Today, as we busily pursue the various courses that life takes us, God calls us to do His work, and when the call comes, we have to answer. But now, answering this call, we might have to reshuffle some things that we wanted to do. We might have to change the course of our actions. It might cause us to have to reapply our talents or refocus our attention in order that we can do the work for God's kingdom. I'm sad to report that just as we react to our parents' call in the past by allowing them to call and call and call, sometimes we allow God to call and call and call. But just as we knew when the breaking point for our parents were, I trust and I hope, and it's my prayer, that we realize what's God's breaking point before He calls for the last time. In our text this morning, we're talking about a boy named Samuel, and as he's being brought to the temple by his mother Hannah, and you see his mother Hannah had promised God that if she gave him allowed her to have a man-child, or to have a boy, a baby boy, she would give him back to the service of the Lord. y'all know the story. Back in those days, men had more than one wife, and Hannah was one of her husband's wives. But she was the wife that didn't have any children. Yeah. And in those days, one of the honors of, and well, today too, but one of a big thing back in those days for a woman was that they could bear a child for their husband. And Hannah was barren. But she prayed and asked the Lord, and she promised him. Sometimes we promise the Lord things, and when we do what we ask for, we forget that we promised him. And I won't go into that too much because that's what we're talking about in Sunday school is God's promises. And so come on to Sunday school and get in on some of that. But Hannah had promised God that if he would allow her to give birth to a man child, when he became of age, she would give him back to service to God. Now, at the time of our text, Samuel was about 12 years old, and his duties were to assist Eli in his priestly duties. And it was his custom to sleep near Eli in case Eli called in the night. He would be nearby, and he could help him out. Now, the text projects that on this particular night, he heard his name several times, and each time he would go to Eli, thinking that Eli had called him. You see, he awoke and he said, "Here am I." And then he found out that it wasn't Eli calling. So the first point I want to make is recognizing the voice of God. From this text, 2 points clearly grab our attention. First of all, be aware that confusion will come when God's voice is not recognized. Young Samuel did not recognize God's voice, so he automatically thought it was Eli. You see, there are many voices in God's house, and if you don't apply God's method of understanding to who is speaking, you can be misled, confused, and downright frustrated, just like Samuel. There are those who hear God speak and they think it's Eli, but then there are those who hear Eli speak and think it's God. You don't get that anyway. There are those that listen to any and everybody. They hear God speak and they think it's just a talk show host, but they hear a talk show host and they think it's God. You see, you've got to recognize God's voice. You see, God speaks through several different. He'll use ministers as a vehicle, teachers and deacons and choir directors, training leaders, superintendents. There are several vehicles that God can use to speak to people. But John 4:1 gives us one word of caution. It says, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit. But test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." So in other words, we got to learn to recognize the voice of God. In whatever way the voice of God comes, recognize God's voice. When God speaks, there's a difference in God's voice. When God speaks, it leaves an unmistakable mark on the soul of man. When God speaks, I'm talking about my God now. When God speaks, confusion turns into confidence when God speaks. When God speaks, the valleys of despair are exalted into mountains of hope. That's when God speaks. We've got to recognize the voice of God. When God speaks. When God speaks, tears of anguish are rolled away and revealing joy, peace, contentment, and a brighter day. When God speaks, the songwriter declares that when he speaks, the sound of his voice is so sweet, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. When God speaks. Now, secondly, we need to learn how to let God speak to us. The text points out that Samuel was not aware of how to let God talk to him. Now, Samuel wasn't ignorant of the things of God, don't get me wrong. He had been raised in the temple. He was well versed in the rituals. He knew the order of service. He was familiar with the Torah and other sacred writings. He was acquainted with the sanctuary, and he knew the order of worship. But when God got ready to use him in his service, he had to be taught how to let God lead him. You see, somebody in here today has grown up in the church. They were conceived almost on the church doorstep. Yet still,
All
They
right.
know the order of service. They know the Bible back and forth. But when God gets ready to use them, they're not ready to answer the call. You got to learn how to let God speak to you. Eli spoke to him and gave him some instructions. He said the instructions on how to respond to God was Eli insisted that the next time you hear God talk to you, don't jump up, but be still.
Come on.
And receive what God has for you. Don't move until you recognize God's voice and you have received your instruction. In other words, just because God says, hey, here I am, I'm up and I'm doing everything in the world that I think God wants me to do, and I haven't heard what God said. All I heard was God call my name. You see, don't move until you recognize God's voice. And then you receive what God has for you. Samuel, the last point I want to make on this is to stop and listen to God. Samuel took Eli's advice, and when the voice of God was heard, he answered, "Speak, Lord, for your servant heareth." Samuel has learned servanthood and submission. He has been immediately available to Eli anytime Eli would call. Now he is ready to be immediately available to God anytime he called. You see, some folks have been immediately available to the homegirls and the homeboys. Immediately available to anybody that call. Phone's right there. You call in and I'm on your side. I remember back a few years back when some folks would call some people and they would be almost up in arms and ready to go beat people up just because they called. They were immediately ready, available to go and do some mischief when anybody called them. Didn't even have to be somebody you like. Just anybody from the neighborhood could call and say, hey, let's go do this. And everybody was ready to go and do this. Let God call and say, let's go do this. Well, Lord. Often we jump too quickly to accept a call to service without pausing to say, "Speak, Lord. Show me the way." Samuel heard the call, and after pausing long enough to recognize who it was and understand, he answered the call. So be ready to obey the word the Lord speaks to you. Know that God only continues to speak to those who do what he says. Let me say that one more time. God only continues to speak to those who do what he says. And now, I've just got to ask you this question. Who will answer the call? Who will answer? Who is willing to? Who is ready to answer the call? You see, every community needs trained emergency workers to answer the call for help. In a small town north of here, a co-worker of mine and a large group of his friends live in a little town called Melissa, Texas. You see, Melissa, Texas doesn't have a regular fire department. They've got a volunteer fire department. And the majority of these people in the volunteer fire department, because of time commitments placed on firefighters, especially those in volunteer service, it can be very demanding. So in addition to responding to calls at all hours of the day and night, these volunteers complete long hours of training, and in many cases, they even participate in charity events in order to help the community. They answer the call for help from citizens of the community that are in distress. One of those volunteer firefighters, the owner of a auto glass shop, he said, "It's just me. If I leave for a call, I have to close the doors and shut down my business." But he was committed to doing that. But then he said, if a call comes in and I'm in the middle of changing a windshield, then the truck leaves without me. So he's unable to answer that call. So the question asked to those willing to be a volunteer firefighter is, when the siren blows, will you be able to answer the call? Now that's another sermon in itself. There's a raging fire. A fire raging out of control in the world today, and there's even some hot spots flickering up in the church. But when the siren blows, are you going to be willing to answer the call? Are you going to be able to answer the call? The economy might be bad, and some say it's outright out of control. But that's not the worst thing going on. Are you ready to answer the call when the siren blows? Hurricanes are making a mess, and some call that a natural disaster. But that's not the worst disaster. You see, there's a fire of moral decay raging out of control in our nation today, from the outhouse all the way to the White House. And the alarm is sounding, the whistles and bells are going off. So when the siren blows, will you be able to answer the call? God is asking, who will answer? God is asking, who will answer the call? Who will answer the call? Will you answer? Who will answer the call? Wait a minute. One day Moses, you remember Moses? Moses was minding his own business on the side of a mountain, watching Jethro's sheep, and all of a sudden, God began talking to him from a burning bush. The alarm went off, a call came out, and Moses really said, well, now wait a minute, who am I that I should go? And who shall I say send me? And you know, I can't speak well. Who will answer the call? Well, what about Barak in Judges, the 4th chapter? Deborah the prophet is asking him, didn't God tell you to go down there to Mount Tabor and take 1,000 men and he would deliver Jabin and his army to you? But he answered and told Deborah, if you go, I'll go with, if you go with me, I'll go. But if you won't go, I'll have to pass this one up. I wouldn't be able to answer the call. Who will answer the call? Well, Gideon in Judges, the 6th chapter, before he would answer the call, he asked God for a son. He said, well, Lord, I'm going to put out this fleece of wool. Around it, I'll answer the call. So God did that. The next morning, the fleece was really wet and the ground was all dry. But even Gideon said, well, Lord, maybe tomorrow if you can do just the opposite of that. Let the fleece of wool be dry and the ground be wet all around it. Then maybe I can answer the call. Who will answer the call? When Jeremiah was commissioned, his response was, Lord, I can't speak and I'm too young for people to listen to me. Who will answer the call? Who will answer? What about Jonah? He'll answer the call, won't he? God told him to go down and preach to Nineveh. He jumped up and ran in the other direction.